Hey, what is up guys? My name is Guillaume, this is Thomann's Guitars and Basses, and in today's episode of Hit the Tone, we talk about the song Barracuda by Heart. Hey guys, hope you're all doing fantastic today and welcome to this new episode of Hit the Tone on Thomann's Guitars and Basses. And today I'm going to be talking about the song Barracuda by Heart, starting with our guitar setup. Barracuda is probably one of the most famous songs of the late 70s, and that intro, he's doing a lot of lifting for it. It's a great song, but just the guitar intro and the guitar sound in the intro just became like somewhat of a legend in itself. That intro was played by Roger Fisher and was played on a Fender Stratocaster, what seemed to be a sort of late 50s maple fretboard sort of Strat. And definitely in the bridge position, there's a lot of treble in there. Now my Strat is not here today, but I do have this PRS Silver Sky in the studio. It's one of our studio guitars, phenomenal single coil instrument. So I'll be playing that one in the bridge position. And let's have a look at our amp and pedal setup. Now the amp and pedal setup is a little bit more complicated because as usual, the late 70s probably means Marshall Plexi of some sort. The thing is, pedals were already quite the thing and it's not as well documented as I hoped it would be. Now there are several things to take into consideration. It's definitely a Marshall-esque type of sound. You've got that kind of almost harsh sort of treble to the sound, but at the same time fairly, I want to say muddy, but in a good way. And you have a bit of a flanger going on during the intro as well. So quite a difficult sound to reproduce at low volumes, even more so because I think that Plexi was cranked to hell and back. But today I'm going to be using the Marshall MK2 Studio, which is a mini Plexi. I cannot crank it anywhere near as loud as it should be, so I'm going to be using the Casleder Toxic Twins in front of it. Just the left side, which is like a Marshall-esque type of blues breakery overdrive. Fairly low overdrive, but I think it'll push the amp exactly to where it should be. I'll also be using the Astra by UAD Effects to add some flanger to the intro. Now be careful, you don't want that to be too fast. It's a very slow type of flanger, and like a full sort of rotation of it would last almost like half the duration of the riff. And I'll be using the Golden as well for a little bit of reverb. Now, as usual for reverb in the 70s, I'm fairly sure it wasn't used in the studio. I'm fairly sure it was not a pedal. It was definitely coming from the miking situation, or maybe added in post with like a plate reverb they had in the studio, but there is a little bit of reverb to that sound, so I think it's important not to miss it. So I'll start playing just the guitar straight into the amp, and then I'll start adding the pedals progressively so you guys can hear the difference. So obviously the pedals do a lot for that sound. I think it's kind of inevitable because that, you know, late 70s, 70s in general, or even back to the 60s, Plexi sound is really, really hard to reproduce at lower volumes. And also most of those amps were modified somehow. So it's kind of hard to say exactly, that's the amp you need, that's the settings, and that's the sound. But I think this is doing a great job at getting super close to that sound. I'm really happy with it. So let's go on the final part of that video, which as usual is the most important and is how to play the riff. Now the usual reminders, please go check out the description box down below because I'll be putting a bunch of links to all the gear that I'm using today, as well as some other recommendations at different price points if your gear doesn't cut it. And now as far as the tuning goes, nothing complicated here. We're going to be playing in E standard. And yeah, let's have a closer look at how to play it exactly. Now, the good thing about this riff is that it's not particularly complicated. There's quite a bit going into it, but it's just like a really powerful sort of rock and roll riff. And I know for beginners, bar chords can be a little bit tricky at first, so you might want to be working on that first, mostly because the second bar chord, the G, is kind of a special one where you're going to be barring the chord, but at the same time leave the B and high E string resonate. So open strings. So that's kind of a different way of playing your bar chords. It's super interesting, but I understand that for beginners you might want to work on that a little bit. So maybe that's going to be a thing. Also, if you're not familiar with harmonics, that's what's happening during the riff. When you go up to the 12th fret, you just put your finger, sort of hover it above the strings without pressing them down, and that's how you get the natural harmonics, which is just so cool to be integrated in a riff like this, I think. Altogether, not particularly complicated, but there's a few different techniques in there that for beginners might be a little bit problematic and that you might want to work on separately before putting it all together. But with that said, I think that's it, guys. You have all the tools you need to hit the tone on Barracuda by heart. As usual, I hope this video was useful and that maybe you've learned a thing or two. And if so, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on future episodes, because they very well could be about your song. Just let me know in the comments which one you want to see me cover on here, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. But in the meantime, I wish you all a fantastic week, and I'll see you next Monday in a new episode of Hit the Tone. Bye.